Hey guys, it's Homie and the Dude, the father and son team. Our sponsor today is GM Ledges, the coolest way to minimize clutter behind your GM screen. If you're like me and you have a laptop, dice, spell cards, pen, dice, minis, maps, and even more dice behind your screen, then like me, you need these ledges to organize your tabletop life. Check out the GM Ledges Kickstarter, their link is in our description. This is Homie and the Dude, the father and son podcast. Today we're bringing you another D&D Diaries. This week we're going to be talking about building your first pantheon of gods. Quite a daunting task, and one that I definitely found very daunting because of some of my opinions and things that I enjoy to do with fantasy and things like that. So. Just so you're aware, we basically moved on from Lost Mines of Phandelver, which is what we've been talking about in our last couple of episodes, and we began writing our first homebrew world called the Sky Realm. We'll tell you little bits about it as we go through the rest of this series, but we started with the Pantheon of Gods, as many do, when creating their world, and for me, I typically like... I don't know, I don't often enjoy the involvement of gods in a world too much. Yeah. For me, it feels like it takes away from the heroes that are in that story because there's always something more powerful and bigger and stronger out there. So
it can change things on like
yeah,
that.
Exactly. And so, there's the whole, like Clash of Titans like series. I'm not a huge fan of that. And don't get me wrong, I love like Greek mythology. I love like Roman mythology, like Norse mythology. It's all amazing, and there are beautiful pantheons of gods that have all these incredible stories.
Doesn't it feel like that in itself has to be really plugged into a story? Like if the gods are going to be involved, they're going to have to be involved. Otherwise, they're sort of a backdrop for the story that can be referenced or something like that. They're either passive or they're active, right?
Yeah, and I fully agree. And so we started going through in our heads what we thought, people would enjoy dealing with the most, how present these gods were going to be in our world, how much the players were going to have to deal with them, how important they would be, and stuff like that. And so what I came to the conclusion of is, like I said, I'm not the biggest fan of having gods involved in the world. So I created the smallest pantheon of gods that I could. So we have 3 gods in our homebrew world. We have the All-Father and his 2 children, one male and one female, reflecting kind of like the good and the bad, the yin and the yang of existence. And so I didn't want to go massively into depth with that because I wanted to allow my detail to go into building the world and like the grungy, down to earth, like on the ground stuff, the stuff that I feel like when I watch a movie or a series or read a book or something, the stuff that I feel really makes a story and an adventure is the stuff that is around them, the things that they're living in, the grit and the grime that these adventurers are having to go through and stuff. So I wanted to save a lot of my detail for that and move kind of on from the Pantheon relatively quickly. However, it is one that I needed. We needed to have the gods because It needed to give us lore. It gave us how the world was created. It gave us how everything came into existence. It informed us of how we created this idea of the Sky Realm, which is something that we came up with, and how we got to that point, basically.
It's kind of like the gods are, for us at least, I think when I look at our gods, they're super, super important for the kind of like the Big Bang moment that created our universe. Yeah. And I think that's, certainly for our setting, that is the most important role that our gods serve, it's almost to set, okay, here's the stage that the story will take place in. And the gods have sort of created those rules, so to speak.
And thus, and since have stepped back a little bit and allowed the people to live and make decisions in the world that they live in and affect the environment and stuff that they live in. So yeah, I went, and honestly it's because a mixture of fear of having to create a huge pantheon and involve them in the world and have different religious groups and all that kind of stuff. I didn't want to have to go into all that. So fear of having to create stuff that I, at the time, didn't feel like I was ready to do. Plus also, again, my own personal preferences of style and themes. And so, like I said, I wanted it to be more about these guys' characters than I did, the gods being involved with them in many types of ways. And so, yeah, it ended up really actually being a great informative tool. Now, the reason I started with the Pantheon of Gods is because, like Tom said, it gives you that big bang moment for us, and it gave us how we get to where we are now. So a lot of creating those gods informed us of the world that we then created after that, based on what we did for the gods and the little story that goes along with them. So actually, in the long term, even though we were working on gods and the people that govern this world, basically, we were actually working on world building stuff in terms of informing us for, what kind of settlements would be in these places. We know, for example, that the Sky Realm is very much based in Ventus's area in Deus, so it's a lot more light, there's a lot more foliage, it's green, it's bright, it's sunny, that kind of stuff. As opposed to the Land Realm, we know it's Alia's domain. We know that she and Gehenna's beings walk freely there, so there's a lot more zombies and undead and vampires and stuff like that, you know what I mean? And so it informed us massively of the world that we were building.
And gave us parameters, right?
Yeah, exactly.
This does fit up here, it doesn't fit down here. This stuff is, that type of almost like guidelines of rails of what you can include and what you can't include.
It was the first set of guidelines that we gave ourselves. We go, cool. So when you first start running the homebrew, everything is open. And then when we create that Pantheon, we put some clear borders in, and we go, cool, this is the direction that we're heading. Do you know what I mean? And don't get me wrong, we were at the time still very open to adjusting that and changing it, but actually it's turned out that what we created ended up working quite well with the world that we have created, and has allowed for us to continue using what we originally created for the gods. So we do have 3 gods. They're called Deus, Alia, and Ventus. Deus being the All-Father, Alia being his daughter, and Ventus being his half-mortal son. And yeah, it was something that we've, and not only that, but I have utilized the gods a little bit since then as well. We've had one interaction with one of the gods through a death of a player, and we've also had some blessings from some of the gods. We've had one of our rogue basically interacted with a cleric on one of our first islands, and there was a blessing there that involved some of the god, and we've involved them as minimally as possible, but yeah, they're still there, they exist, and we've, like you said, they give good parameters to a world. So if anyone is wondering what a good first step is, and you're wondering, in this sea of possibility, where do you start? Try a pantheon, try a couple of gods, and they might give you some clearer direction on where you want the rest of the world to go.
I mean, for us, another variable was just resources. If we expanded this whole huge, family of gods and all of the personalities and all of those interactions, it felt like that was just going to be an additional amount of work on top of creating our settlement. And I think if you get it right, and you get all the rules right, all of the guidelines and the framework right, and everything fits in there, that's the hope. And I feel like we've done that to this point. We may find later on that we're like, oh shit, the gods have to change some rules because we need to go in a different direction. Yeah. But as of now, everything kind of fits into the framework of the gods. And I guess that's probably another point, which is, what are your resources? Do you have enough time to build out a substantial side story of how the gods interact, especially if none of the gods are actually playing characters or NPCs or anything like that. They're just kind of in the background. Do you have time for that? And the second is, if you do have time to do gods, maybe a smaller sect of gods is the way to go, and then really think through, okay, so how are the rules established, and will everything that I want to do fit into those rules? And you can only do a first attempt at that, and you might have to modify it, but at this point we're still within those rules.
Yeah, and by just to reference what you said, by rules Tom means, for example, like I talked about, in the Sky Realm, there's a lot more foliage, there's a lot more green, because of the fact that it has a lot of light. There's just sunlight up there, where on the Land Realm, it's actually shrouded in cloud, so there's a lot of darkness. It's more of a desert Mad Max kind of vibe down there. And by rules, what Tom means is like stipulations of how you then create the variables in your world. You create the different things that are going on, and you understand what fits in certain places.
Yeah, rules is probably not the right word. I mean, maybe like, what is the reality of the world? Right?
Yeah, exactly. And I think the other piece of advice I'd give, adding on to the little pieces that Tom just gave there, as the last little bit, is use references, guys. Like, at the end of the day, there is, they even put it in the player's handbook, different pantheons of gods that are in the D&D world, pantheons of gods that are Norse, Greek, Roman. They reference all of those in the player's handbook. But if you want to, go do some research on that kind of stuff. You know, I did a little bit of research for our Allfather, choosing his name and stuff like that. All of the names are things that I chose based off of personalities and things like that, and translations and stuff.
Certain archetypes.
Yeah, certain archetypes, exactly. So, you know, use references. There's a lot of gods that have been created in a lot of movies and a lot of stories, and furthermore, there's a lot of gods that have been created in religions that exist in the world that we live in stuff. Use references. It will help you creating those gods, and it's not plagiarizing when you're taking an idea of a core archetype, like Tom said, and twisting it to fit your style. That's totally cool. That's totally fine. And at the end of the day, I don't think the ancient Greeks are going to mind if you plagiarize Zeus. You know,
true. And really, like, how many archetypes are there? Like, you know, there's you know, good and all the variations of good. There's bad and all the variations of bad, and then there's sort of the gray that, you know, kind of go between good and bad. And it's just kind of fitting in where, you know, where that god sits in those. But those are pretty clear. Like, there's not a million archetypes. No. You know, I don't know what the number is, but yeah. So there's an established baseline of information that you can draw on, and then just tweak it for your own, you know, however you see your god, however you picture that your god interacts with the world. All of those things are then add-ons, bolt-ons to some stuff that's already created, which is probably the easiest way to go.
Yeah, for sure. And like, I'm sure when you come up with the world concept, you know, I came up with like floating islands was like the concept, and then getting to floating islands, you know, we had to go, well, how did the islands become floating? How did the land get in the sky? And with that, you know, the pantheon of gods aided us in creating that and getting to that concept that I originally had. So yeah, guys, I hope this gives you some direction on building your pantheon of gods. I hope you have an idea of what you may like to create, and I hope this kind of helps you maybe narrow it down, or give yourself maybe a good starting point for creating your homebrew as well. But either way, thank you all so much for watching. This has been Homie and the Dude, D&D Diaries, and we look forward to seeing you in the next one. We're going to be talking about building our first settlement.
Yep.
Very excited. Look forward to seeing you then.
See you guys.
We're chugging through. We're loving doing this stuff for you guys. If you want to support us, if you want to make sure that we can keep getting, you know, better quality set, better quality lights, make the filming better.
Bigger batteries for the camera.
Bigger batteries for the camera.
Yes!
You know, all that kind of stuff. You can do that by just liking, following the page, and subscribing to the YouTube channel. That is what really makes a difference to us.